Hello there. Welcome to episode 47 of Bow and Blade, a podcast brought to you by medievalist.net, your home for all things medieval on the internet. Bow and Blade gives you a seat at the bar as scholars of medieval warfare go beyond the Wikipedia articles to talk about the debates and the questions that we're working on today. I'm Michael Livingston, Distinguished Professor at the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina.
I'm Kelly DeVries, Distinguished Visiting Professor of Military History at the Air Force Academy and Professor of History at Loyola University in Maryland.
And we're
Got
not
a third
alone.
one.
Yeah, we're not alone today. Today, we have with us the ever distinguished, utterly incredible friend of the podcast, Myke Cole, who is the author of numerous books, many of which I have on my shelves, like right here in the office, like right over my shoulder, including the Bronze Lie, Legion versus Phalanx. He's done some amazing science fiction and fantasy work, and most recently, had to work with me on a book that has just come out. Hi, Myke.
It was you make it sound like it was a trial. It was a delight. and it's very and I certainly couldn't have done it. It would be half the book it was. So
yeah, so Myke and I we just had a book come out. It's called The Killing Ground, a biography of Thermopylae, or Thermopylae, or however you wish to pronounce it. We are kind and indifferent about such things.
Welcome, Myke. It's going to be good. We've invoked your name on a number of podcasts, and
we have.
Now other people will be able to hear the voice behind the name.
Oh, thank you. It's very good to be here. Is it worth taking a second and telling listeners how we know each other? Because I enjoy telling the story a lot, Kelly. In fact,
absolutely,
I told it on the Ancient Warfare podcast when we were interviewed, but I'll be happily tell it again. So I know both of you because when I made the decision that I wanted to branch into history, I reached out to Myke. I met him at Dragon Con. And the reason I did that is that we were both science fiction and fantasy writers, but he was a professional scholar. And so he had been writing in military history for a long time, and I was trying to branch into it. And Myke very graciously became friendly with me. I think that he saw pretty quickly I was serious, but he also saw that I'm not a professional at these things. He said, "Hey, why don't you come to Charleston? You can meet Kelly." And I flew to Charleston, and I actually wound up guest teaching a class on cyber warfare to the cadets there. So it helped that I had something to offer professionally there as well.
It was great. Myke, I got to interrupt you. I just got to interrupt. Sorry, it's going to be like story time with the Mykes here. So Myke's given this. It was a lecture in the evening on cyber warfare. It was and it was great. And in the middle of it, I don't know if I told you this, Myke. Myke is animatedly in front of the classroom, and he's like going to town and like talking all this stuff. And he's also using a lot of sailor language, shall we say. And in the middle, and the cadets are just in rapt attention. And I see in the back of the lecture hall the door open up, and my provost comes in and sits in the back seats. And Myke's up there. He's just going to town. Like,
oh, no.
Here's some language you've never even heard before. He's going to town, and my provost is back there. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right. I might hear about this tomorrow. And in fact, I ran into her the next day, and I was like, yeah, so thanks for stopping by. I didn't expect you to be there. And she was like, that was really enjoyable. He really had their attention. And I was like, yes, he did, ma'am. Yes, he did. And that was all I ever heard about it. But I was scared. It was quite something.
That is definitely me, for which I apologize. I was certainly freer with myself back then than I am now. But that evening, if you recall, so Myke, you had very graciously looked at Legion versus Phalanx, which is what I was writing at the time, and talked to me about historiography and look, there's a trade to being an historian, right? Which I, as an autodidact, did not at the time have much experience with. A little training, but not much more. And Kelly, I don't know if you remember, we went to this wine bar. What is this? Yeah. What's the wine bar that we always
It was a restaurant. It's now closed, unfortunately. It's called Monza.
Oh yeah. No! know.
Yeah, we went to Monza, which was our
I know
favorite.
We did.
you knew
Yeah.
the owner, and well, so we're in there, and Myke, you had been I had told you that I didn't have an intention of going to the battlefields, that I thought that I could study them remotely,
Yeah, you did.
which I can be forgiven because I've never done this before at the time. And you turned to Kelly at the dinner and you said, Kelly, Myke is planning on going to writing this book without ever visiting the battlefields. What do you think? And Kelly, I don't know if you remember, but you paused, you looked deeply into your glass of wine, and you looked up at me and said, I think that's really stupid.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And then it was the next 2 hours of you two laying into me about it. And again, I apologize for repeating myself, but the really moving part of the whole thing was that after you convinced me and really taught me that that was critical, and it's certainly become a part of how I approach history, you came with me. And I want
yeah. Well, what you don't realize, Myke, is that was our plan all along. We wanted to get to go to Greece. Couldn't tell our universities why we need to go to Greece.
Right.
And you provided that opportunity. I mean, you were putty within our hands on that one.
It was wonderful. It was wonderful. And it was a really, really, it moved me very deeply. And it was a very selfless thing. And that, I really got a crash course. I think a lot of graduate students would pay a lot of money and spend a lot of years to get the amount of education that I got from both of you and how to do history, how to be a real historian in a very short period of time. And that's how the relationship, we were off to the races ever since then. So that's how the relationship started.
And that visit to Greece has enhanced my teaching. I was just teaching Pharsalus the other day and was able to say, oh, yeah, we were on top of the Byzantine fortress on top of a mountain looking down at the Pharsalus. And can you imagine this plain covered with Roman soldiers, for example? And
man.
Yeah, so it was, I think we all profited from that. That was a great trip.
It was a terrific trip. Really was. And yeah, I mean, there you go, everybody. Kelly and I are awesome.
Yeah. But I think it also segues to the fact that we've got a bartender in front of us now, very impatient to know what are we drinking.
Well, I mean, in light of today's subject, I've got to have I can't believe I'm saying this, I got to have some Retsina.
Oh dear God.
I was going to order Retsina too, but the last time I bought a bottle of Retsina, I mean, it was a whole liter bottle. I'd be surprised if I got a second glass out of that. As you guys were complaining through the entire liter.
All right, so hold on. So for the listeners,
so I might have to go with some of those grapes, some of those white wine that I had at Macagiolis in the little restaurant while you guys were sleeping off jet lag. 6 liters, and they were grown on the side of Mount Olympus. Right. So that's my wine of the evening.
Good man.
So just a little story here. We were on a hotel porch on top of Delphi, the home of the famous Oracle, and taking our notes. And I think I was live blogging for Osprey as we were doing the book. And we went through that bottle of Retsina pretty quickly. And I'll say this. I don't know if those of your listeners who have not drank Retsina, it is essentially, at least cheap Retsina, like drinking a tree. It tastes like pine sap. That's what it tastes like. It's not good. But once you have a few glasses, shockingly, it's better. And the redemption story is I took my fiance to Greece just in June. I was giving a paper in Sparta on my last book, The Bronze Lie, before this one. And we went out to dinner and we ordered Retsina. And I tried to warn her. I was like, I just want you to be prepared. This is terrible stuff. But we ordered a really good, expensive bottle of Retsina, and it was delicious. It was the opposite of our experience in Greece. So turns out that we drank cheap Retsina.
Which I'm shocked. It was like a 2-liter bottle, like a pop bottle, soda bottle.
It was
like,
a pop bottle. It literally was a plastic bottle full of Retsina. I don't think that was the same quality, no.
Covered in dust. They were like, cool, somebody finally bought that thing. Like, oh my God.
I was glad we hadn't smoked that night, because I think the whole place would have gone up with us with that Retsina. But
my lord. So yeah.
So that's what you're going with, Myke, drinking the really expensive Retsina.
Yeah, I'll have a bottle of the expensive
There.
Retsina to try to wash the taste of the cheaper out of my mouth.
All these years later, the taste is still with you.
It was so
Yeah,
good.
so
Hey,
we're doing Greek stuff. I mean, right, we're doing Greek stuff because
yeah.
yeah, Myke and I just had this book come out, Biography of Thermopylae. Um, which is, and it's the #1 release in ancient Greek history.
Yeah.
We got to
Means another
contextualize.
great history book has to come out this week. But beyond that,
That's right. Yeah.
uh,
So, of all the people named Myke Cole with a Y, I am your favorite one.
Yes, you're #1. Go team.
but I got to ask, gentlemen,
Yeah.
it's a great book. I loved it, reading it. I was astounded because it's not just 300 shirtless guys directed by Frank Miller at the big battle we always think about. You got 27 engagements here. How did that come about?
That is a great question, and the one we try to answer in the book. 27 engagements and actually 16 battles, 16 full-on battles and 27 military actions. And look, there's lots of reasons which we get into in the conclusions chapter of the book. And obviously some of them are pretty clear. Thermopylae, just from feats of natural process and physical geography, is some of the most naturally defensible terrain in the entire world. But also some of it has to do with the position of Greece, not just physically in the world, where it sort of sits on a main transit route that gives access to the Mediterranean, and with the Cyclades Islands providing the ability for ancient medieval ships to island hop, right, to put in, to take on water, and to access the north coast of Africa without having to cross open sea in a fairly unique way. But also geopolitically, in that Greece continues to occupy, but has occupied a sort of a similar position to that of Ukraine, which is this sort of crossroads between imperial powers that are competing with each other, that need to control that space or gain access to it to get to each other's throats. So it's sort of like a perfect storm of things. And then one other thing that we cite in the conclusions paragraph, which I think is really pretty moving and fascinating, is that Thermopylae very rapidly, because of how significant I think 480 BC, which is the second, and I'm using air quotes here because we really don't know exactly how many battles were fought there, right? The 27 combat actions are the ones that we know of, but because of that legend that is born almost immediately out of that second battle, Thermopylae takes on its own almost mythic significance in the minds of the people that fight there. And we know this because we have their poetry, we have their generals giving pre-battle speeches, and we know that it meant something to the people fighting there, that it was Thermopylae, that Thermopylae was a place you were supposed to defend. And that sort of mythic significance, I think can't be discounted in the choice that people made to defend it.
I mean, that's curious because I can feel it there. We're military historians. Often we talk about the ground telling us things. That there's so many people who passed there. There's so many who were serving their country and didn't make it, and it certainly has that vision. And even for people, when I show slides at the place, for people who aren't there, they can feel it too. They feel the importance.
Yeah, it really is a kind of sanctified place. As Myke has said here, 27 that we know of, military actions, not all of them full on battles, but nevertheless military actions. We think it's probably the most bloodied ground on earth. It's 2,500 years that we traverse in this, from before 480. That's the one that everybody knows. That's, this is Sparta, the 300, all that garbage. That's 480 BC. We go from before that all the way up to the last fight that was kind of there is actually a saboteur action in World War II. That's like one of the most incredible, like this needs to be a movie, like Force 10 from Navarone, like things. It's incredible.
It is.
There's the Smithsonian just ran. Anybody out there can read that chapter alone. We have an excerpt of it, not the whole chapter, but an excerpt of it that ran in Smithsonian Magazine. It's online. But yeah, so it's 2,500 years again, as Myke said, that we know of. And like how I wasn't ready for that when I signed up for this project. Myke literally texted me. I remember I was in Costco. I was in Costco just like getting some stuff for the week, and I get text from Myke, and he's like, "Oh my God, did you know that in addition to 480 there was?" And then you listen, it was like maybe 9 dates at that point. It was like there were all these other battles there. Isn't that incredible? I was like, I did not know that. That's pretty cool. And he was like, it'd be really cool. It'd be a book on like about that. And I was like, yeah, that would be really cool. And then sort of like next thing I knew, he's like, yeah, so here's some thoughts on the book we're writing. Oh, is that how this is? Okay. But yeah, then when we got into it, and of course I was more than happy to do this. Myke's an awesome dude. We started getting into this, and yeah, it was like, oh, we found another one. Oh, we found another one. Oh my God, there's another one. It really is a fascinating spot to have all this. The other day we were on this other podcast, Myke and I, and there was this question like, does anything compare to this spot? And we just kind of couldn't really come up with anything.
No,
maybe Jerusalem. Maybe the number of times Jerusalem's been attacked, or Damascus, but those are the only ones I could think of.
But there's one critical difference there, in that Jerusalem is, I mean, it's a capital. It's a major destination for pilgrimage. It's a it's a place of significance. And Thermopylae is just kind of in the middle of nowhere. The one exception, I would say, and this is actually something that Myke discovered, which really I think has the potential and might be something that we should look into more in the future, is that Delphi is sort of looked on as this religious epicenter, really political religious epicenter, almost like a sacred United Nations for Greece, right? And not just for Greece, but for the Mediterranean basin in the ancient world. I mean, we know that the Persians sought oracles there, and people from further afield. But that happened later, and that in the Archaic period, it was part of a two-pole, and in fact, the junior of the two, of Anthela, which is right down the road from Thermopylae. And this is not a secret. Myke didn't discover that, but he certainly discovered that no one had paid attention to it. Like, it's just a few fleeting references to it, and he really dove into it and sussed it out and made us go look at it, and that played into the significance that it might have passed on to the past. But I want to be clear, even as I bring that out, because I think it is a really important historical point that, to my knowledge, no one else is making. Thermopylae really is the middle of nowhere. And when you go there even today, there are a few like caravanners, people living in their vans, that are around this hot spring where people, go to take the water, and it's certainly beautiful ground, but there's not any major cities. There isn't a port. It wasn't a trade route. Like, there's just nothing. So that is really, I think, what begs that question. Why here? Why is everybody fighting? And they really are.
And it's the ground. I mean, that's Myke is now I've got to discern my mics here. Myke Livingston is always talking on our podcast about the terrain and emphasizing how important it is. And it is, in Thermopylae, that's all we're talking about. Like you say, there's not a big city to attack. There's not religious significance to it. There's not anything that Jerusalem or Damascus might hold on to. We're talking literally about a piece of ground.
Yeah, and one of all these different battles. You're like, why are we doing this on medieval podcast? Well, because a whole bunch of them are in the Middle Ages. Like, again, it's 2,500 years worth, and the famous one everybody knows is 480, and that's archaic Greece, and it's incredible, and how we can talk about that too. But also there are all these medieval ones. And you mentioning the ground. Well, 539, the was the 11th battle.
Mhm.
The 11th battle that we know of,
Mhm.
we have no doubt in our minds that there are engagements that happen here that we just do not have a record of, that didn't survive. But the 11th battle that we know of occurs at Thermopylae. It's between Byzantines and Bulgars. What exactly constitutes the Bulgars? Don't really know. It's a
Well, I think
bit of a
I,
mess.
I think it's, yeah, I was about to say, I think it's important. The Bulgars, I think, I mean, certainly the progenitors of the Bulgarians, but when you're dealing with medieval and ancient sources, and they're talking about Huns or Scythians or
Yeah.
Goths or Bulgars, they're talking about confederated, you know, tribal peoples that are riding under a single banner. But I wouldn't think of them as a cohesive political entity.
Yeah. We know that they had actually busted through Thermopylae just 2 years earlier. I think
Mhm.
is correct.
Mhm.
In 537, and had really pillaged a lot of Greece, had plundered quite a bit. And Justinian the Great, says we're not playing that game again. And quickly recognizes, well, where am I going to stop them? If I'm going to stop them anywhere, it's going to be at Thermopylae. Because again, that's the ground, and of course that's the sacred traditional spot. And what's cool about 539 to me, um, is we don't know hardly anything about what happens there. It's one of these, like, we know there's a fight. Um, the Bulgars do not get through. Um, but what's fascinating about it, even though we kind of like don't really know sort of what happened, we don't know the troop dispositions, we don't know like what the actions really were. The reason we kind of know about what's happening is because Justinian, in preparation for this, refortifies this pass.
Mhm.
And you can see the fortifications today. So you actually see them if you kind of know what you're looking for. You can see most of them on Google Earth. If you know what to look for and you're kind of experienced with satellite imagery, you can find them. And it is incredible because they more or less, on the whole mountainside of Calidromo, the famous mountain that sits next to Thermopylae, that the immortals go over the top of in 480. It has natural defenses and cliff faces and things. But what they basically did is, anywhere there was an opening in all that craggy wasteland, anywhere you could get through, they fortified it.
Mm.
To the point that they made like this, almost like a fortification miles long. I mean, it's not right, but by bridging all these natural defenses, and you can see it in the landscape. And we have the receipts essentially from from the Byzantines, because they recorded everything because they're Byzantines. Procopius writes about it in his secret history because he's mad that this much money is being spent on this project.
Well, he praises it in the buildings and then rips it up into secret. It's like two different.
Of course,
It's really schizophrenic. It's amazing.
He
Procopius.
is.
But I mean, I'm glad you bring up Procopius, because the thing that is so frustrating. One of the so a book called Beyond the Gates of Fire came out. I don't know, Myke. I think maybe 10 years ago, or
Longer than that, I think.
yeah, and that covered some of the battles of Thermopylae. And it's an excellent book. One of the things that Myke and I set out to do here was be as comprehensive as we could, and to get all of them. And what was so both frustrating but fascinating, one of the things that and again, I talk a lot about Myke's historiography on interviews that we're on together, so it's very embarrassing. He has to sit there and listen to me talk about him.
I am very embarrassed.
In the third person. Tell me more. Tell me again about my eyes. But one of the things that Myke, you taught me is, when you and Kelly, you're involved in this too. When you did your case books for Brunenberg, for Crecy, one of the things you did, and that I really took to heart was that you burned the ground, basically. We're starting from scratch. And now we are going to reckon everything, every source, right? No, we're not going to miss anything. And of course, when you do that in history, you get all these little dangling threads where there's a line or a that's all you get is a paragraph. And you made the conscious decision not to omit that. And was a big part of our thinking in doing this book, is that you will see that some of these combat actions that we cover in it, we've gotten criticism from this, from reviewers who, it slows down the narrative. Well, maybe it does, but our goal here is to be comprehensive. So in some cases, we have to hit a battle and say, here's what we know. These people fought here, and we don't know who won here. And that frustration dogged us throughout the medieval period in this, because there's a thin sources on the ground. And then you get to Procopius, and he is just a breath of fresh air, because he's given you the wars and buildings and the secret history, and he can't shut up about what is going on around this period. And when that illuminates these one line, there's all of these chroniclers in this period that basically give you a year and then say this happened and this happened and this happened. Marcellinus Comus is one that we used extensively in this period. So for example, Attila the Hun fought at Thermopylae. Attila the Hun, he's famous. We got to write about that guy. And you get like one line. Attila was very angry. He came south. He stopped at Thermopylae. And Myke and I are sitting here being like, well, then what happened? Nope, that's all you get. That's all you get on Attila the Hun. So Procopius, it was like breathing. It was like being fed after, starving in the desert for many years. Very grateful to him.
Now, to our younger audience out there, Myke and I don't actually burn any ground. We're on. We just want that stated out there so we can get back to these battlefields and so forth.
Yeah.
It's a metaphor. But you're absolutely right about Procopius, about this story. I do have to add that our friend Myke Livingston gave this as a paper in of all places, Istanbul this summer, to a lot of Byzantinists. And in fact, he was in the prayer room of the Suleimani, one of the prayer rooms of the Suleimani, the madrasa that's attached there. So we all had to take our shoes off to hear his paper. And he wowed the Byzantinists. They were really impressed.
Well, it was good slides. And
it was good slides.
And also, like, you guys had to take off your shoes to be in my presence, right? I mean, that was what was going on, wasn't it?
I do think though that, like, this is the thing, is that we do narrative history here, right? And we want to make it exciting and we want to make it accessible. And your work on History Hit, Myke, is a great example of that. Like, we're in the look, these are wonderful stories and we're excited about them. We want them to reach as many people as possible. And not everybody has the time to pursue historical scholarship in the kind of in-depth way that we would like. But historiography, doing it correctly, is super important. Like, anytime I go on social media, and I get this all the time in the Bronze Lie, there are all these accounts about Sparta, sort of perpetuating this myth of Spartan warrior greatness. And they have, 250,000 followers, and they're just posting nonsense. And that risk in pop history of divorcing what's exciting and cool and fun about history from the scholarship that makes it real history, that's a real risk. And one of the things I've always really admired about what both of you do, and what I've try to participate with you in doing, and I'm certainly really proud of what we did in this book, is we're going to tell a great story. No one is going to read that chapter that we put on, that the Smithsonian Magazine was kind enough to run, and say this is boring stuff. Like, that story is amazing. But we do not back off of what you have to do that. And one of the things that you have both done, and Myke, you certainly did it in Brunenberg, is bring that historiography into the narrative. Not only are we going to tell you the story, we're going to tell you how we figured out this story. And that I think is incredibly valuable and something I'm very proud of.
Before leave 539, I got two questions. One is Procopius right in the secret history, or is he right in the buildings in suggesting that this was good money spent or bad money spent? And the second question is, was there actual engagement, or did those fortifications simply keep the engagement away from that past then?
All right, so I'll take the first one. And then I'll let Myke take the second one.
Sure.
The first one is actually a really interesting kind of question. Like, was this money well spent? Well, it was in the fact that it held. And there's sort of no question about that. It's also because of the way that Thermopylae, this area, behaves geologically. It's money that you can't spend just once if you want to hold this area. So rather fascinatingly, I mean, look, geographic, topographic change is a thing we have to deal with, right? Whenever I'm reconstructing something, I got to deal with that. But in most places, it's mostly like, we got to get rid of that building. We got to like rethink where the forest lines are. It's that kind of stuff usually. Maybe a river, moves a little bit here and there. It's usually not drastic. Thermopylae is drastic. The shoreline that Leonidas, died next to is now like 5 miles from the sea. The ground that he died on is like dozens of meters below the ground that we all like sort of stand on and take pictures on. It's radically different. And the need to try and fortify this area changes accordingly because through Thermopylae itself, the frontage that you have to shut down to close it is growing by these dimensions, right? So that what part of the reason Justinian is having to do what he's having to do is because the pass is so much wider now. And so you have to extend the fortifications. And what they actually appear to do is they try to like literally build out what it once was, right? Let's just try and build out walls from the mountain to try and like create this constriction that was previously there. They're trying to keep that alive. Now, at a certain point, you just can't. So that obviously, when we get to in World War II, there's an amazing Battle of Anzacs, who are fighting off Nazi Panzer tank division as they're trying to hold back the Germans in order to evacuate Athens behind. I mean, it's a amazing repeat in many ways of 480. 2,500 years later, here we are kind of doing the same thing. And as Myke was saying earlier, the guys who are doing it know it. They're like writing poetry on the site, like, we are standing where he stood. Like, this is, and I mean, it just totally resonates. But the kind of defense they're doing is totally different, right? I mean, not only are we dealing with machine guns and artillery and tanks and such, but just the terrain now that you're having to close off works entirely different. So the defense works differently. So the technological change on top of the topographical change and tactical changes on top of that, right? All of this is layered up at Thermopylae. So yeah, it worked. So good money spent for Justinian, but also like it's kind of like putting your finger in the dike or whatever, right? Like it's not going to hold forever. Like it's good for you, good now, but like another crack is going to open up. It has to, because of the way this terrain behaves.
Yeah. One of the points that Myke has made in previous interviews, which I'd like to reiterate here, is that Myke has made this point that defending Thermopylae itself, they'll find a way around. I love this idea of you're putting your finger up against the dam there, the water's spraying around it. So why do it at all, right? Why invest to fortify? Why do this? And one point that Myke has made and that we put in the conclusions, which I think is really well made, is that what we don't see is how many people take a look at this fortified pass and go, not trying, not worth it. One of the points that Myke makes, is it a never greater slaughter, Myke, that, and look, this is a point that certainly Myke didn't invent it, but he really popularizes it, I think, in an effective way, which is that for people who are not scholars, there's sort of this idea that, you have more troops, you have good ground, you fight a battle. That's what John Wayne would do. And that's just not how warfare works, right? Canny commanders throughout time avoid battle. Battle's incredibly uncertain, even when you have a real advantage over your opponent. I mean, Myke brings up the point of the Black Prince being captured, not the Black Prince, the King of France being captured at it's a Poitiers, right?
At Poitiers,
Yes.
yeah.
Right.
But I have to say this, you're giving me credit for this. This is Kelly DeVries.
Yeah.
Kelly DeVries writes a terrific piece on the ways of war, and how commanders more often than not
my apologies.
avoided it.
Kelly, you'll get your due credit when my 17th century book comes out and all of your medieval military technology stuff is cited in there. But the point is still germane, right? Is that, so when you ask yourself, what's the point of fortifying and defending this place if it can be bypassed, if it can be attacked? And part of the answer is because it's a deterrent. People don't even bother. And unfortunately, now we're in the position as historians of trying to prove a negative, which is really hard to do. I think we do a really good job.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really important point. Now to your other point, Kelly, about whether or not there was an engagement there certainly was. And Procopius tells us that he specifically talks about the Bulgars attempting to storm the fortifications there and being unsuccessful, and then finding a way around, and then ravaging Greece all the way to the Peloponnese. But one of the points I really want to make about this, which I think is really germane to it, is that we have a couple of examples here, both from Procopius and from the 3rd century AD, that are relevant to this point. So you have these fortifications that appear to be, at least judging from 3rd century sources that we have, manned by local peasantry, right? So you basically have an empty fortification with maybe a single sentry on it, and then the balloon goes up and the peasants pick up their, pruning hooks or whatever their farming implements are and go man it over some kind of Roman, and I'm using the, for people who can't see me, I'm using air quotes here, commander. And we certainly see this to be the story of the battle that we cover in 254 BC. But we also then see in the 3rd century, and I understand I'm straying outside of medieval military. I believe that medieval warfare begins at 378 AD with the Battle of Adrianople, per Professor Rahman, which I know is a controversial point, but that's my line in the sand for medievalists. But we have a letter instructing a 3rd century tribune to levy troops as a permanent garrison that is taken to Thermopylae in the 3rd century. And then Procopius is very clear, and we write about this in our chapter in 539, that one of the things that Justinian did, to his great credit, he says this in The Buildings, which is the book that praises Justinian, as opposed to the Secret History is the book that tears him down. And he's basically saying that one of the things that Justinian did, to his great credit, is he said, enough of this levy peasant system. We need garrison troops that are professionals here at all times. And when you think about that in the context of 539 AD, for an empire whose military resources are as taxed, and we go into that at some length, as those of Justinian's were, that's a real big commitment to make. And it says something very, very powerful, not just about the deterrent effect that we just described, but about the importance of actually holding it in the event of an attack like the one that's in the chapter. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but there are a few points.
No, but you brought up an interesting point that leads to a question that a lot of our listeners will have, which is the Bulgars went around.
Yeah.
They found a way around. That's the story of the 300 too, is the Persians find a way around. So if you're finding a way around, why hold out here?
There's always a way around. I mean, that's the number one answer to that, right? I mean, and that's just basic military philosophy. Like there's always a way around. It doesn't matter what it is, right? There's always a way actually off of Alcatraz. Like like it may not be a great way, right? It may, but like there's always a way. And one of the things that we did find fascinating here, is that everybody thinks about Thermopylae as this single pass, right? I mean the whole myth of Leonidas, not to go back to the ancient stuff, right? The whole myth of Leonidas depends upon he's standing athwart the Persian advance, right? This "you shall not pass" kind of Gandalf thing, right? Well, it falls apart like literally on its face because of the multiplicities of ways through. This probably isn't even the main road. He's on a secondary road. And even if you get through Thermopylae, you have more mountain passes, or multiple other mountain passes, at least one of which you have to go through to get to central Greece. Going through Thermopylae, you don't get to central Greece. You get to Epic Numidian Locris, which is not like the end all be all. You still got to go over another pass to get to where you want to go. So yeah, there's always a way through. And even here, there's two main roads through, Thermopylae being one, and the other one being the Edi Pass, through what's called the Dema Gap. So you got those two, and then all of these others, all these other like spider webbing up the mountains, right, and up through these little vales and stuff to get around, and that's everything that Justinian is fortifying, right? He fortifies the main roads, but he also fortifies all of these other little spurs to try and make it one big wall. But of course, even if you block off this whole route, well, how about going on the other side of Mount Oedi, right? Like you could do that, and go up around that way. Like how much trouble do you want to go to? You can find your way around. And clearly in this case, the Bulgars, we don't know the route they took. We don't have that information. All we have is they got around. Like how did they do that? Did they swim? Did they, we don't know. They probably did not swim, but like we just literally don't know. But if you go to enough trouble, you can 100% get around here. But it is maximizing that trouble to which that becomes the deterrent, as Myke said, right? That, well, if it's going to be this much work to do it, it's not worth it, right? The cost benefit analysis does not come out in my favor every time this is a shot. Which is what Myke was referring to earlier when saying, the deterrent effect of this, yes, there were these losses that we know of, and there were wins that we know of where nobody got through. But if you were being honest, and of course there's no way to count them, but if you were being honest, you'd have to put in the win column all of these other times, Lord knows how many, that somebody was like looking at a map, and was like, we're going to go in, boys. And then like, wait, we got to get through what now? No, we're not going in. they just didn't bother. I call it
that's
the forfeits,
the first sign of good fortification is the deterrence factor.
Yeah.
Yes.
And even if you're fortifying, like, as the story of 480 has always taken up place, but it's to delay the Persians. I don't think Plataea happens without the defense of Thermopylae, and the fact that Xerxes wants to take them on there. Probably the same in some of these with the Bulgars. They've got a limited time to get down there before winter hits, and to sack the rest of Greece before winter hits. So any delay is going to benefit the Byzantine Empire as a whole, because the Balkans is not sacked as much as it could be if there's no fortifications there. Is that how I'm reading it?
Yeah. One point I wanted to add to Myke's, I do, it's a little frustrating. Well, I mean, it's not frustrating, but it's to be expected, is that modern people who are very secular and practical and are, maybe don't always grasp the kinds of motivations that might cause someone to do something like make a decision to defend. And one of the examples that we brought out from 1942, and I think it's important that it be a modern example because it shows the hold on this, is that the guerrilla leader, so the British Special Operations Executive that operated in the battle that we described, that's in Smithsonian Magazine, they used as allies communist guerrillas. And those communist guerrillas were under the command of a guy named Aris Velouchiotis, which I love. It's Greek. It means Ares, the god of war, from the city of Velouchitis or Velouchiotis. And he was this really hard-bitten guerrilla warlord from the 1940s. And one of the things he's documented to have really grieved was that when the Nazis defeated the Anzacs and drove them out of the pass, that the Greek army had already surrendered long before that. And there was no Greek blood shed in the defense of the pass. Now, Velouchiotis was a warlord, like he was a military commander. That was a hopeless rearguard action where the Anzacs were just trying to buy time to evacuate Greece. There was no serious attempt being made to hold, because there couldn't be. The Greek army had surrendered. The Wehrmacht was just blitzing through. There was complete air superiority. The Luftwaffe controlled the skies. There was no hope to defend it whatsoever. And Velouchiotis is not a fool, right? This guy was a very canny commander, which is why he was such a boon to the Special Operations Executive. And to him, the dishonor of not having Greeks die in that useless, futile defense was heartbreaking. Like, he couldn't stand it. And that's in 1942. So I think about what it must have meant to people in the Byzantine Empire and to the Crusader states that were down there, and to the ancients themselves, how significant trying to defend and hold that place must have been from just a metaphysical perspective. And again, I'm not just pulling this out of thin air. Like, we have Velouchiotis's experience as an indicator, and I do think that did have an impact on why people made that decision to put in there.
Good answer. What and bringing up the list of engagements, we do have two in 1203 and 1204. 1204, presumably the Latin Empire of Constantinople, as it was called after the sack of the Fourth Crusades. Divergence off to Constantinople instead of going on the Holy Land.
Oops, as we call it.
Oops, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there was some other things that others called it, contemporaries called it, and almost always anti-Venetian, which probably is accurate. Then there's no conflict from then until 1822. Do you think there was, and we just don't have it recorded, or do you think that the Ottomans maybe had a little bit different idea about what to do with Greece, how to come into Greece? And I know I'm asking you to make history out of absence. Absence of evidence does not mean evidence, but why do you think there's a big gap there?
Great question. Which is what you say when you don't have an answer. Yeah. Part of it is, the strength of the Ottomans, right? The strength of the Ottoman Empire at this point. Once it kind of settles into this area, why would there be a fight here, right? It's more or less controlled. You also have a very sharply changing, means of even moving in and out of Greece, right? You're getting a lot more naval, actions and transport and stuff that you could not have done, right? Attila the Hun isn't going to sail anywhere. So you've got a changing sort of technology, and the geopolitical landscape has changed drastically. Now, by the 19th century, that of course is changing, in and of itself, right? Because you have now these rebel actions that are coming up, and Thermopylae becomes central, in that fight, and becomes part of the national myth of the rebirth of Greece. Which is what, like, the Battle of Alamana Bridge is in some respects, or many respects, really, I should say. And then of course, this becomes this holding point in World War II. But but yeah, I do think there probably are.
Yes.
Despite me saying, well, this is probably why there wouldn't have been many. There probably were some, and we just don't have record of it. And look, if anybody out there is listening, and you're like, hey, you missed one, oh my God, please send it to us.
Let us know.
Please send it to us if
Second
we missed
edition.
one.
Well,
Yeah,
but I mean,
second edition.
but this is another historiographical point that Myke taught me that I was very liberating, actually. Because look, I've made mistakes. I commit myself to a position in the Bronze Lie that I reversed myself on in the Killing Ground. And I was so relieved to be allowed to do that by the historiographical lessons you taught me, which were that, and I use this quote all the time, the important thing is to get it right, not to be right. And one of the wonderful things that we're doing in history is we are asking and answering questions with the evidence that's available to us. And if there's a better answer or evidence that we missed, we want to know. We would love to be wrong. Like that's getting closer to the truth, which is what this is all about. So yeah, if anybody has anything out there, please, you're not gonna hurt my feelings.
And I have to give a shout out here to Myke, because that is something that I mean, I don't want to name names, but Kelly and I both know a great many people that we could list off the top of our heads who will not budge, right? This is what I once wrote 50 years ago, who knows, like, and
Yes.
I shall never change my opinion ever again, and thou shalt not question, like, and it doesn't matter what evidence you have. And so yeah, it's actually something I think all three of us have in common is yeah, like there's no ego in this. What is it? And Kelly's amazing on this, right? I mean, we've talked.
That indicates I've made a lot of mistakes, but yeah.
But
Yeah.
that is the part of it, like the idea that history is nothing if not an imperfect striving towards some true depiction of what happened. Like, what are we doing here? Like, I mean, look, on the one hand, this is a great story, right? Like, that's fun. But also, and this is one thing that I've really felt very lucky in, is I've had a lot of careers, and they're all, I didn't realize until sort of lately, that they're all the same, and that is a police investigator, an intelligence officer, a forensics, all of these investigative jobs that I've done. But they really are all the same. And what they are is you're looking at evidence and you are sifting it and sorting it and trying to see through the fog of your own bias. And your ego really takes hold, right? And tries to pull the wool over your eyes. And you're trying to dispense with that to get some approximation of what really happened, whether you're trying to solve a crime or reckon what's going on in a geopolitical situation so you can inform military commanders or figure out the truth of an historical event. And that quest for truth, either that's what you're doing or I don't know what you're doing, but it ain't history. And what a liberating gift to be able to look at your work and be like, oh, I made a mistake. Great. We're closer to the truth. It's wonderful.
This is where we have to bring that eminent philosopher Indiana Jones into it, when he says in the first movie, if you want truth, go to the philosophy department, not because they have it, but because they think they have it. We're looking for accuracy. We're looking for the closeness we can come to accuracy, but there's always going to be questions. And when we're dealing, I mean, what I find very interesting in your work here on Thermopylae is the consistency, so that there is this place that is important, made famous by Herodotus 480 BC, but it continues and it tells the story of that area better than if you were to sit down and write a narrative history of Greece. Here we have a very important place that is warred over 27 times at least.
Yeah. And one appeal to listeners, go see it, please. One of the things that is so frustrating to me is You know, a lot of battlefields, and we actually talked about this in the Ancient Warfare podcast, you know, they're sort of flat plains, they're fields, whatever. But the listeners to this podcast and the people that are on medievalists.net, they know something about the story that's underneath it. And Thermopylae, it's more than its story. Like, look, some battlefields really are just flat. It's a field, man. What are you going to do? You know, if you're lucky, there's wildflowers. But Thermopylae is some of the most visually dramatic, stunning. Like, you can't believe it's real when you're standing there with Calidroma roaring up off your shoulder and this like hot, you could smell the sulfur from the hot springs bubbling away from you, and there's olive trees everywhere, and talk about wildflowers, like, it's beyond beautiful. And when you know these stories and you stand there, if you're not moved, you are not paying attention. And I'll tell you one thing, like, when you go to Greece, islands like Mykonos and Santorini, where a lot of tourists go, they're very expensive, but not the mainland and not Thermopylae. It's a cheap vacation. Go check it out, please.
It does remind me of the first time the three of us were there, and that tour bus pulled up and everybody got out and took a picture of the monument, the 20th century monument, and didn't even look to the other side of where the battles were fought. I just took the picture of the monument, and the monument is ugly beyond belief, and not certainly representative of the great events that happened there. They didn't even look behind them to see what the mountain was.
Yeah, you're like, cross the road. The Kolonos is right over there. Like, just cross the road. Like, take 5 minutes. Come on.
But it was a typical. Now, I must admit, I don't think they were Americans. Usually, that's the American trait: stop and take a picture of the irrelevant things, and not of the historical things. But it was quite defining as exactly what people see. It's like Delphi. You have to want to be there, but once you're there, it's just priceless.
Yeah. And you know, to Mike's, sorry, now it's just becoming like story time. You know, to Mike's point about the, you know, the cheapness and the kind of wonders of it. The people are amazing too. They are so amazing. You know, Myke and I, we I think it was the day we went up hiking on Calidroma. But maybe not that it matters. We stopped in this little, like, we were like, we need to get something to eat, and we're up in the mountains, and then we're like, I'm just looking at, like, you know, Google Maps kind of thing, like, well, there's in this dinky little village, there's a restaurant listed, well, let's go there. And so we go into this village, and there's like nobody, and pull up, like, okay, this looks like this is the restaurant. There's a sign, okay, it appears to be the restaurant. Like, are they open? Like, I don't know. We go
it looks like somebody's house.
Yeah, well, of course it was. Like, it was literally the house. Like, but like, we go and like, are you open? And yeah, there's a couple tables. The kids are doing homework on one table. And then the mom and like Nana are like in the kitchen, and they're like, yeah, you know, come in. They don't speak any English. They bring out a menu with pictures so we can point. Myke speaks some Greek, thank God. So he's like kind of pulling it off. I'm just saying thank you to everything, because it's about the only Greek I really know. And like, we make our order, and we thought we had ordered, I don't know, like 2 dishes, right? And she starts bringing out like piles. I have a picture of Myke, like, ferociously trying to eat. We're at a table, the two of us, and it's like a decent set. 4 could have sat there, and the table is covered in food, and they're like bringing stuff out, and we don't. Like, Mike's like, we can't be rude. He's trying to shovel stuff down. I'm like, dude, we can't take this many calories, man. And like, so then we tried to leave money, because it was like ridiculously small bill. I don't remember what it was, like 10 euros or something. We tried to leave more than that. And she saw, and I remember she like comes waving at us out of the kitchen. No, you can't leave. Goes back in the kitchen, comes up with one of her plates, and had mounted it with more food, put tinfoil over it, so we could have this for the road. We're like, what is going on? This is insane.
This is
the Greeks, for just culinary reason, Greece should be visited. I don't think I've ever had a bad meal there. in anywhere.
It's such cool people. But yeah, it is beautiful.
They are great.
It is really beautiful. Yes, as Myke said, everybody, make it a research trip. You know what I mean? So it comes off taxes, and go to Greece. And if you want, buy our book and
take it with you.
And take it with you. And
I
send
would
us a
say
selfie.
do that, definitely. Yeah.
Send us
I
a
mean,
selfie.
it really is designed so that you can. We've got lots of wonderful maps in it that Myke put together so that you can walk that, not just the battlefield but the region, and see what you're standing on.
So much history, so much history there, and on the islands as well. The trip that all of us went to, we ended up in Rhodes.
Wonderful.
It's an amazing place, and it was nice getting back there. Crete is amazing. Even some of the smaller islands, go to Patmos. There's nothing there but a cave and a monastery, but it's pretty important historically. Yeah, it's just one of those things. And I really think it's amazing to do a biography of a site. And so congratulations, gentlemen. I think this is a real achievement.
Thank you. I'm glad they let us use that. I mean, we'll see, but I really liked that as a subtitle, and I think they had some misgivings.
Your publisher, I mean, afterwards told me he loved it.
No, this was, and Myke again is being modest. It was his idea, and to really center the past as a character. And one of the wonderful things about that is that because it's so both politically and tectonically active, like all good characters and stories, and remember, Myke and I are both novelists, Thermopylae changes over time, grows and develops, and winds up in a spot you would never expect, which I thought was just a really wonderful metaphor for it. And when we first did it, our publisher pushed back and they were concerned, and rightly so. They were like, well, look, if you call it biography, people won't know where to shelve it. It might wind up, and these are the kinds of things that booksellers worry about. And Myke was adamant, and I'm very glad he was, because it really does. Look, what's the point of doing this if we're doing something that's been done before, right? Yeah. Beyond the Gates of Fire already attempted to cover more of the battles, but we tried to make it comprehensive, and we really tried to center the past as the main character of the story. And I'm really proud of that decision.
And look, not the scoreboard, but #1 new release in ancient Greek history the week it came
Greek
out.
History.
Put that on a t-shirt,
Yes.
Why doesn't anybody recognize me when I'm walking around the street?
#1 of 1. We're #1 of a category.
We're number one.
So
enjoy it. Somebody's going to come out with a book on marathon. That happens every month, no doubt.
Yeah. Next week we'll be out of the #1 spot, but right now, baby, we're on top of the world. A very small world.
It's a good achievement, and it should hold for at least 1.5 weeks.
Oh, thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Kelly. Now we know we're winners. We're winners, and winners get sprinkles on their ice cream. It's going to be a good night.
I think we're done. I don't think they're going to bring out ice cream tonight.
No,
I think the bartenders are a little bit worried about you guys.
They're going to lock it up on us. Myke, we do something. We don't do it every episode, but some episodes we do, which is we kind of ask, what is it you wish you could have when it comes down? Now, usually, of course, we're looking at a specific battle, right? So we're like, we wish we had a source from the other side. So this is a bit of a kind of a mean question, because we've got 2,500 years of stuff here. But like, if you could, like, the genie, comes in, you got 3 wishes and you knock 2 out for world peace and some stuff like that, curing cancer. And then you're like, all right, I got a gimme. I got one more. And he's like, cool, but it has to be something Thermopylae related. Sure. Is there anything, like a source or a story, something that you would actually want?
Yes. There's so many, but the burning one, and I'm sorry, can I depart from the medieval world?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the questions that we surface in 480 is we have 2 conflicting stories about Leonidas's decision after the immortals surround the Greek position, right? And Leonidas pushes west. And we have a story from Diodorus Siculus that it's a night assault on the Persian camp with it in an attempt to kill Xerxes and then remove the head of the snake.
Love it.
And then we have the story from Herodotus that it's sort of this desperate, who cares? Everyone's gone. I'm just going to make a mad rush and die so that I can fulfill the oracle, which Myke and I have a very different interpretation of what that meant. But I am dying to know, because Diodorus and Herodotus basically confirm each other, but on that one point, that one very dramatic point, which says a lot about where Leonidas's mental state was. I would love to know the truth of that. I would love to know, have some source, some contemporary source I was there. This is what happened between the moment they got surrounded and Leonidas fell.
That's a good one.
Thanks.
That's a good one, man.
Yeah. What about you, Myke?
I was gonna say I wish we had a Xerxes account of 480. Like it's all I really want, like how did they remember this, right? And again, look, if somehow somebody out there is like, yeah, there is one, nobody's ever used it, do please send it along. But yeah, to know, like, truly from the other side what the perspective is on this, man, do I wish I knew.
It'd be interesting to find out if he just would say, "Oh, this is a pissant."
Soldiers,
we'll just take him out and then move on.
Thermopylae, what was that? Was that Tuesday?
Oh, is that time where we got delayed for 3 days? Oh
yeah, we got delayed for 3 days. That one where we had those irritant goats up in the past.
That's right. Like he's probably looking at this cottage pop culture industry that has like shaped Western civilization, and he'd be like, "What? This is the thing you guys are excited about? We were slowed down for 3 days. I went home. What's the big deal?"
Well, you guys both hit what I would be interested in, especially the Xerxes thing. But I, being more of a medievalist, I've got to go the Ottomans' way, and I want to know what the Ottoman, if this ever occurred, because the Ottomans were very focused on history. They knew what they were doing. They knew how they tread upon their ancestors, and the fact that they had gone around, captured Thessaloniki in 1430, captured the whole Greek peninsula, even before they went back to Constantinople. They must have known. I would be very, very interested if somebody in the Ottoman bureaucracy didn't stop and say, this was a really important place. Maybe we ought to go up there and just take a look. It'd be interesting to hear what the Ottomans thought about that, because they did see themselves very much as the descendants of the Persians.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I'm surprised nobody went for Attila the Hun. What happened?
What happened with Attila?
Attila the Hun, half of it is malarkey anyway. We know that. He doesn't write, but he has the greatest propagandists around.
Well, look, all I can conclude from that is we're three very brilliant folks with really good answers there.
If we say so
ourselves. Listeners for our insufferable navel gazing.
Well, look, they're locking the doors. Thank you for joining us, Myke. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it, man.
Thanks so much.
This was a great chat. Please do join us next time when we'll be doing Halidon Hill. So we're moving in a very different direction to head up yonder.
But very important. Very important.
Yeah, very important. Very important. So we'll be excited about that. Bring your dogs along to listen to that one. As ever, a reminder, this podcast is sponsored by medievalists.net. So the best way to support us, other than buying our individual books or our jointly written books, in this case, of course, is to join their Patreon at patreon.com/medievalist. That's also the absolute best place to drop us a line if you have a question for our next Q&As, which is in like 2 episodes or something like that. So we're coming up fast. Hope everybody enjoyed this. Cheers, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.